Okay, so let's begin. Let's get right to it. UC Berkeley is the #1 top public schools and best college rankings between 2022 and 2023. With such fierce competition in the field and being at the center of Silicon Valley, how does the school maintain its prestigious position and its competitiveness?
The key to Berkeley's maintaining its prestigious position and its competitiveness is its faculty. We hire wonderful faculty and we try to give them all the resources they need to do their best work. And we're very lucky that our faculty think that Berkeley is a place that they can do their best work, and they're very dedicated to the mission of Berkeley, which is to provide opportunities to a very broad range of young men and women so that they can achieve whatever is their dream. So I think Berkeley is great because of its people, because of its faculty, and because of our extraordinary students.
So the faculty attracts the students into the...
Yes.
Okay, so there are two great movies released this summer, Barbie and Oppenheimer. We know that Oppenheimer features a distinguished Berkeley former faculty member. And so we were wondering, has the success of the movie had any impact on the school and also specifically the physics department?
That's a wonderful question. Oppenheimer, of course, tells a very important Berkeley story. So I don't think the movie in and of itself has had an impact on Berkeley, but the story it tells has had a huge impact on Berkeley. Whenever I give anybody a tour of the campus, I go to a parking lot that's above the campus where you can see the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, which is a national laboratory that was responsible for a lot of the research that Oppenheimer did. And I always say, unless you understand this laboratory, you don't understand Berkeley. Both Berkeley and the laboratory have been so closely intertwined together, and it's one of the reasons that Berkeley is so outstanding an institution. It used to be, in my earlier days as a faculty member, that I knew lots of people who had worked on the atom bomb project. Now, unfortunately, most of them have died, and so that's less the case. But it's such a living part of Berkeley, and the sense both of the physics department, but also of the campus as a whole.
Has it influenced the department's research at all?
I don't think that it has influenced the department's research in that physics has always been an extraordinarily strong, an extraordinary strength of Berkeley. And right now, the physics department is very focused on quantum physics and the kinds of extraordinary discoveries that can come from that. I think the way the movie affected Berkeley is I heard lots of complaints from faculty about all the detours they had to take when they were filming on campus.
It's very interesting. But also, did it attract more people to go to see the schools? And
I'm not sure whether it has. I mean, we have over 125,000 applications now for about 6,000 spaces, and because the movie is just opened, we'll have to see next year whether we have even more applications.
I think it will. And so the other movie, Barbie, it highlights women's struggles in a male-dominated environment. So UC Berkeley has been at the forefront of promoting gender inclusivity. And we were wondering, with remarkable leaders like Nobel laureates Jennifer Doudna and Carolyn Bartozzi, and of course yourself, how does the school foster a gender inclusive environment and create an inclusive setting that helps support women's progression in academic and also administrative roles?
Thank you for that question. Berkeley has always been a place that is deeply committed to gender equality. It's had a women's studies major and then later department since the 1970s, and Berkeley is a place of revolution. It's the furthest west you can go in the United States, and people always think they're creating a new world in Berkeley, whether it's through the research in physics we were just talking about, or through free speech, or through gender equality. We have, I'm very proud to say, more women than men currently in my cabinet. So a lot of the leading administrative leaders for the campus, and we also have about more women deans than we have men deans. So, so we're trying to give lots of opportunities to women for leadership, and also it's just part of the Berkeley water, a belief in equality of opportunity.
Well, you joined Berkeley in 1970, I think, and then you became the chair of the English department from 1985 to 1988, and then the dean in 1988 and on, and then chancellor in 2017. So how has the challenges differed when you switched these roles, and how has your leadership evolved over those years?
That's a really interesting question. First of all, I'll talk a little bit. When I became chair of my department, I thought it was the hardest job I had ever done. First of all, I was fairly young. I was the first woman chair. And most of my colleagues that I had what I often thought was more an imaginary than a real power over were older than I was. They were my senior colleagues. And in my first year, I had so many problems. 2 faculty members, very sadly, died unexpectedly. We had 2 cases that we were putting forward for tenured professors reversed by the chancellor's office. And I just thought, everything is working against me. And I went to a conference that was for new chairs. And I still remember a title of a talk I heard called Problems, Problems, Problems. And the point of this talk was that unless something's a problem, it doesn't come to your desk. So it's just a mistaken idea to think you're going to have a position of leadership and never have to solve problems and never have to do hard things. As I moved to progressively more positions that had more authority, I started having a broader sense of what the issues were that I needed to address in order for the university to achieve its goals. However, I think the thing that was most important in developing the qualities that I needed as chancellor is I spent 11 years as president of Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. Smith is a women's college, and I went there, and almost all the leadership positions were held by women. The faculty was more women than men. All the students were women. And I felt, on the one hand, my goodness, there is nothing that women can't do in this world. And on the other hand, it taught me to do a lot of things that the positions that I had held at Berkeley hadn't taught me how to do. I learned how to be a public person. I learned how to work with a board. I learned how to raise money. And so when I came back to Berkeley, even though Berkeley and Smith are very, very, very different, university and college, I took lots of the lessons back, and that enabled me to be what I hope is a good chancellor.
Smith College sounds like Barbie world. It actually prepared you for the real world.
I don't think so many people wore pink there.
That's really cool. So, how did you deal with all the stress, and are there some strategies that you could share?
It's so important to make room in your life. When you have a position like this, you could spend 24 hours a day and more doing the work of the position. So you have to make time in your life on the most simple level for sleeping, for eating well, but also time for friends and family, time to do the things that you love, so you maintain a kind of balance and perspective in your life. I think if you put enormous amounts of pressure on yourself to work every minute of the day, you're actually going to be a less effective leader than if you make sure that you understand some of the things that are also so important for living a rich and rewarding life.
Very well said. So looking back on all those years, What 3 words would you use to describe that journey in your life?
Integrity, vision, and belief in the institution.
Very good words. So moving on to words, freedom of speech. It's very important for democracies like US and Taiwan. And in 2017, just when you became the first female chancellor at UC Berkeley, protests broke out on campus with some conservative students claiming that Berkeley was intolerant of conservative views. So as a fairly liberal school in a fairly liberal state, how do you ensure that freedom of speech is upheld? And could you clarify the distinction between freedom of speech and also hate speech?
That's a wonderful question to which I've given lots and lots of thought. First of all, I think freedom of speech is extraordinarily important, not for the views that you agree with, but for the views you disagree with, that you may even think are abhorrent or hateful. And so I decided when I came in as chancellor that I was going to devote a lot of resources to making sure that conservative speakers could speak on campus. And we successfully did that. So now we have a fair number of conservative speakers on campus. There are no newspaper headlines saying, conservative speaker speaks on campus. There have been no demonstrations. In that sense, it's been a success, but it took a lot of work. So after we had the free speech crisis of the beginning of my chancellorship, I appointed a free speech commission to give the entire community time to think deeply about free speech and why it was important. And what I always try to do when I talk about free speech is to talk about the difference between things you have the right to say and things that are the right things to say. So in other words, there's a difference. I'm sure in Taiwan, like in the United States, but there are very broad rights to freedom of speech. For example, when Trump says, I won the 2020 election, that is his freedom of speech to say that, even though it's a lie. You can say lies, falsehoods, you can say things that are really hateful, and unless it's a direct threat, it's protected by freedom of speech. But that's different from doing the things that are respectful of the community. So we have a set of community principles that we developed at Berkeley. I talk a lot about them and talk a lot about how important the right to free speech is, but also the importance of responsibility to the community in choosing how you speak.
Could you give like an example of maybe?
Yes. For example, I think that.
Was there a specific topic?
Yeah, a good topic. We've had intense conflict at Berkeley between people who very much support the state of Israel and people who are highly critical of the state of Israel, indeed think it shouldn't exist. And so we've had lots of discussions, even very sharp arguments about whether saying I don't believe in Zionism, Israel has no right to exist as a state, which some members of our community hear as anti-Semitic. And so talking about that, talking about you have a right to say this, but you have to understand in saying it that you're making members of our community feel deeply hurt, and if you're showing prejudice against them. I don't think these lines are easy to draw, but I think they're so important to draw for a democracy like the United States, like Taiwan.
Okay, so on that topic, after COVID-19 broke out, a lot of people like with anti-Asian racism and violence has increased a lot. And with 43% of the undergraduates at UC Berkeley being of Asian ethnicity, how does the faculty administration address racism on campus? And also, could you share some of the measures that were taken to combat discrimination and also promote more inclusivity?
Yes, indeed. I mean, first of all, the principles of community are really important, and we keep returning to them over and over again. Also, something important to realize about Berkeley is it's a very attractive place for provocateurs that are not part of the Berkeley community to come and provoke, because Berkeley gets in the news. It gets in the national news. And so people who want a platform for what they want to do often come here. That said, this is a time when more statements of prejudice just generally in the United States are uttered. And we try to have community discussion about what it means to be an anti-racist institution. And that's an identity that we've really embraced. When something happens, we speak out strongly about it. But we also try to work with our community to say, this is how, this is the responsibility you owe to your community. We talk a lot about, we want every student to feel that he or she belongs at Berkeley, that he or she is included in what Berkeley is.
So does global affairs play an influence within the campus? Like, for example, rising U.S.-China tensions. Has there been incidents or situations that erupted because of this?
That's a very interesting question. I just used an example with the Palestine-Israel conflict of where global affairs really did erupt into the campus. And anytime there is a tragedy somewhere in the world, the earthquake in Morocco, for example, that just happened, we have so many members of our community that feel affected because we're a global campus. I've actually, given the state of national politics, have been surprised that there are fewer instances of conflict about China. Maybe it's because we have so many both Chinese students and Chinese American students, as well as faculty and staff at Berkeley. So it's been less a flashpoint of tension than you would think. And in fact, people at Berkeley generally, I include myself in this, feel we're the two biggest economies in the world, and we should be able to figure out a good way of relating to one another. And I think that universities are some of the most powerful ways in which we can do that.
Moving on to a lighter topic, you have a PhD from Yale in English, right? And so your passion for literature is well known. How do you think reading has benefited your leadership?
I think I'm the storyteller in chief for the campus. So much of what you do when you're a leader is tell a story. Tell a story of where the institution is. Tell a story of where this particular project is. Tell a story about free speech. Tell a story about whatever international crisis is happening at the time. And so studying stories, which is what I did as a student of English, has really helped me with that aspect of the job. Also, so many aspects of my job are understanding people and understanding people in complex situations. And that's something I've really learned from my study of fiction.
Well, how does your background in literature inspire connection between science and technology and also humanities at UC Berkeley?
I've always felt that writers of fiction anticipate discoveries in science before they actually happen in the laboratory. So one of my favorite books to teach is Frankenstein. And of course, Frankenstein is the story of the scientist, Victor Frankenstein, who creates a human-like creature. he's so appalled by this creature, he rejects him, and then the creature goes on a kind of rampage of destruction. And that book, to me, poses the question that's so important now in the world of AI, is if you create a proto-human creature, what responsibilities do you owe to it? What rights does it have? And writers of fiction have started writing books about exactly that situation. Machines Like Me by Ian McEwan, for example, is a book about a set of robots that are created and then owned by people. And they start becoming human, and the people decide that they can do anything that they want to them. So it's, Clara and the Sun by Ishiguro is about a kind of future time in which children are genetically lifted, but also have very fragile health. And so they have these human-like dolls that are their companions and their guardians. And the book asks the question, what rights do these dolls have? So I think that often writers of fiction anticipate the kind of existential and philosophical questions that scientific discoveries confront us with, often before those discoveries are made.
But do they have answers to that?
Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. I think that, for example, to go back to Frankenstein, I think you finish, or at least I finished the novel thinking that Victor Frankenstein was wrong to disown his creature and created a lot of the destruction that happened.
So it's on him. It's on him. The responsibility lies on him.
Yes.
Okay, so what are some gems, like the books that you've been reading? Could you recommend a few books to us?
Oh my goodness, there's so many books that I really love. It's hard to pick out just a few. I mean, certainly Clara and the Sun is a wonderful book, as is Machines Like Me. There's a book that I was thinking of actually earlier today called The Last Chef in China, which is because I was thinking about the incredible tradition, culture of Taiwanese cuisine and also Chinese cuisine. Oh, there's so many books there's so many wonderful books. Right now I'm reading a book called I Have a Few Questions to Ask You by a writer named Rebecca Mackay, which is very good, about a young woman going back to confront a traumatic issue in her past.
We'll definitely check those out. But in the digital era today, an average human being has the attention span of only 8 seconds. So how has your reading habits changed, and how do you encourage younger people to read?
My reading habits haven't really changed. I still prefer books between 2 covers in print, although I do listen to audiobooks and do use a Kindle on occasion. And I just love reading. It's my favorite recreation. But I encourage young people to read just by talking about how exciting books are and how try to introduce them to the pleasures of good book, and then I think it becomes almost addictive, reading good books.
Do you have any tips on how to settle down and concentrate on reading a book with so many distractions?
Just give yourself a quiet place and a comfortable chair.
And turn our phones off.
Yes, and turn your phone off, or take a long airplane trip and don't turn on the Wi-Fi.
We were talking about AI, Frankenstein and then AI. So with the rise of AI, some argue that we should encourage its use in schoolwork because it could help students prepare for the real world, the application in the real world. So what do you think are the benefits and challenges of its use in the academic field? And should we promote or limit its use in assignments today?
I think we should very much promote the use of AI. It's an extraordinarily powerful tool. Let me use an example that's a little bit more trivial than AI, but I'm old enough to remember when calculators came out and how worried everybody was. Everybody will forget how to add, subtract, divide, and multiply because you can just do it on your calculator. Well, I think AI is a tool that is so powerful and can really be a kind of platform that you can use to do even better work. So I believe that AI is here to stay, the genie is out of the box, and that faculty, students have to figure out how to use it to advantage rather than use it as a kind of substitute for their own thinking. So I believe AI it already is part of our world, and that trying to understand what are the principles that we should use in our employment of AI? What do we, what are the philosophical questions that it poses? That it's not that I don't think that there aren't some very difficult questions it poses, but I also think, what a tool, what an extraordinary tool that can help us in the sciences, for example, solve kinds of problems that we didn't think we could solve at all without the kinds of capacities of AI.
But what about, there are plagiarism concerns. What about its use in assignments? What if students turn in assignments that were created by AI entirely? How does, like, UC Berkeley, do you have regulations or?
We are trying, I think the whole academic world is trying to figure that out right now. I had a colleague who said, well, you can use AI to write your paper, but it'll probably be only a B paper and not an A paper. And it's also on us as professors to think up questions that demand creativity rather than the kinds of things that AI can probably produce at this point.
A big job.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so to sum up, last question. In 2018, at Berkeley's Luncheon in the Library, somebody asked you, what keeps you up at night? And as the chancellor, you said, budget, budget, budget. Well, today, 5 years later, what would your answer be?
Budget, budget, budget. I think I'm never very far from the issues of resources and figuring out a stable financial model for the campus. But I would say, in addition to that, one of the things that makes these jobs challenging is there are always new problems. Sometimes they are sudden tragedies that happen. A student dies. Other times there are unanticipated, unprecedented kinds of problems like AI. And so it's one of these things that makes this job incredibly interesting, but it also can mean that you get less sleep at night than you might.
Okay, well, that's all we got.
Okay, thank you.
想看最完整的新闻内容，记得下载 TVBS 新闻网 APP。